wanted to talk to you today about a revolution of love. Revolutions are major turning points in history and in our lives. Regardless of where they occur, some common factors are generally present. The causes generally include some kind of great divide between the social classes, a crisis which negatively impacts the masses, increasing unhappiness or loss of faith in the government or ruling power, and in the democratic revolution, the desire for equality and ideals and philosophies which provide a common rallying ground for the disempowered. I wonder, could we see parallels in today's America? But one contemporary leader has written about our society in the world in his recent book, which he titled Revolution, expressing it this way: some believe that our country is in decline, that the worst is yet to come, that our civilization is being wiped out, that only withdrawal or civil strife can be on our horizon, that to protect ourselves from the great transformations taking place around the world, we should go back in time and apply the recipes of a previous century. But others imagine that our nation can continue on a slow downward slide, that in that slide the game of political juggling, first dominated by the left and then by the right, will allow us some breathing space, and led by the same faces and the same people who have been around for a long time. But I'm convinced they're all wrong. I believe that what's wrong is their model, their recipe that has failed. Who do you think wrote that? Those words were not written by Beto or Pete or any other of the dozens of candidates for president of the United States of America. Those are quotes from a book called Révolution by Emmanuel Macron, now president of France, who led an insurgent movement independent of the existing political parties to capture the presidency of France a couple of years ago. Ironically, the policies that he has now put into the French Republic are now seen by the vast majority as elitist and out of touch with the common people. But historically, I am told, and I read, that this can be the pattern of many revolutions, whether figurative or literal. Reformers who were united by their idealism and opposition take power, but then their idealist differences fragment their authority, making them vulnerable to autocrats, to a counter-revolution. On a small scale, we might analyze that the Obama revolution opened the door to a counter-revolution of Trump authoritarianism and neo-capitalism. Macron, as his own popularity has waned in his response to the issues of the common people, he has warned France is a country of regicidal monarchies. It is a paradox. The people want to elect a king, but they would like to be able to overthrow him whenever they want. And in his book, The Youngest President in the History of France discussed his broader vision of how France's future might be part of a new world that is undergoing a great transformation. But the transformation the French are seeing now and the transformation that we are seeing in this country may not be what the common people would really prefer if they were self-aware. So what kind of revolution could there be that would be appropriate? Craig Brenton, an American historian, analyzed the tendencies of the society prior to the major revolution that has been experienced in history over many nations. He saw a pre-revolutionary society as having a combination of social and political tensions, generally caused by what he thought of as a gradual breakdown of the shared values of the society, which led to a fracture of political authority. As the governing body begins to rely upon an increasingly desperate use of forceful means to control and remain in power. Along with this is the emergence of reform elements that serve to emphasize the corruption of the political authority. And as the existing political order begins to lose its grasp on authority, momentum builds among the diverse forces of the opposition, and then the government becomes more precarious, and splinter groups unite to form a threat to the existing order. He also observed, Crane Britain, that the different stages of major revolutions often include after the government is overthrown, it can be replaced by the opposition, and there's a period of optimistic idealism. Those revolutionaries feel that they have the upper hand finally, and they try to perfect a new kind of society. But in general, this phase does not last very long. The practical tasks of governance have to be faced, and a split develops between the revolutionary moderates and the revolutionary radicals. We saw this in many revolutions over the generations, from the French Revolution of 1789 and the Russian Revolution of 1917 and many others. It ends in the defeat of the moderates, the rise of the extremists, and concentration of all power in the extremists' hands. As one faction prevails, and to try to maintain its authority, the use of force is almost inevitable. The original goals of democracy in the revolution will fade, and a totalitarian or more authoritarian regime will take command. A few of the basic goals of the original revolutionary movement may be incorporated in the end, but overall, it can be a repressive ending for the revolution itself. About 10 days ago, I went out to a demonstration in downtown Houston at the site of one of the centers where refugees, migrants without papers, those seeking asylum, and others have been confined. There were over 1,000 people there in protest. I believe there were over 100 police authorities in uniform, and who knows how many out of uniform. 50 of the protesters wore yellow shirts or could otherwise be identified as Unitarian Universalists in actual physical testimony of their support for the program we generally call Standing on the Side of Love, which is now On the Side of Love. There were lots of disparate people in opposition. One of the groups passed out a newspaper with this title, Revolution. You think you're woke, but you're sleepwalking through a nightmare. This system cannot be reformed. It must be overthrown. A message from the National Get Organized for an Actual Revolution Tour. Of course, then at the bottom, their website says this is the American Communist Party who is promoting this particular kind of revolution. But they're trying to appeal to a broad coalition of disaffected citizens and residents of the United States. To you who are fed up with this country and solutions that are no solution. To you who are angry and defiant and want to see an end to white supremacy, patriarchy, gender oppression, persecution of immigrants, imperialist wars and occupations and threats, the capitalist plunder and destruction of the environment, an end to all or any of the horrible forms of oppression and exploitation that define and intertwine with this capitalist imperialist society. To you who seek not justice for yourself, or even just your own people, but the emancipation of all humanity, there is a way out of this madness. Hand it over to the extremists, clearly. That will have a great outcome for everybody. My thesis is it would not. My thesis is that we must rely on the institutions that were originally formed after our successful democratic revolution. The Constitution that was put in force in 1787, when it was adopted by 2/3 or 3/4 of the original 13 colonies. My thesis is that to have a revolution to achieve the ideals that we as Unitarian Universalists value, and which are actually the democratic ideals on which this nation are founded, our role is to insist on using those institutions effectively, on using our moral suasion, as Reverend Martin Luther King asked us to use 30+ years ago. The ideals that were expressed by all of the astronauts as they undertook their voyage to the moon and back, for peace and hope, for a more perfected democratic and egalitarian society. I found an article by Heather Christian Strang, a spiritual teacher, mentor, and author. What she said is like Nina's song, another song. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. My thesis is love is one ingredient of what we need. Somebody, but it wasn't Albert Einstein, said a wise truth. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again while expecting a different result. And what we see on the world stage is hatred, anger, pain, and fear projected out in violent acts and events. Not only acts of human beings, but acts of governments, which evoke more fear, more defensiveness, outrage, judgment, and blame, which seem to justify more violence and revenge in response. What would happen if instead of doing what we've always done, we get to a tipping point where more of us were choosing other options, living in a new way, trying to free ourselves of that insanity of repetitive patterns? What if we chose to follow the wise counsel of Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, and even that guy in the Middle East who called himself Yeshua ben Yosef, Jesus? Each of these heroic examples have told us to try to love our enemies, to respond not out of our anger, but through compassion to loving action. Imagine what would happen if, instead of responding instinctively out of our pain and fear and anger and hatred, we tried to follow their guidance, to put into action a love-centered way of living. Could we somehow find in ourselves the courage and compassion in search of refuge? I've been to several demonstrations and workshops, seminars led by Reverend William Barter of North Carolina. He is trying to lead in the example, using the example of Dr. Martin Luther King. A national moral imperative, a response demanding the moral high ground of using our democratic values and our democratic institutions to transform society toward the model of equality and justice and truth for all of our compatriots in this United States. Heather Strang also promotes what Nina has been preaching to me for the past 12 years or so: nonviolent communication, nonviolent engagement. And Heather Strang points out 5 ways to bring forth that nonviolent revolution and transformation of society. She offers these suggestions. First, commit to dealing with conflict without violence. Even when we watch crime dramas or violent films or read books which glorify violence as a form of entertainment, we are saying to the universe by our actions, yes, I accept this and I want more of this in my life and in the world. Why would we think that watching people pretend to kill each other, even in revenge, is a form of entertainment? That's sort of like that insanity formula. We must acknowledge the destructive message that is sent not only to adults, but also to children and youth about how to treat others. The good versus evil, the Manichaean construct of how the world conducts its everyday life, is one that we in the entertainment industry have been focused on not only in our time, but throughout the history of the world. These distorted forms of entertainment may help to keep us in that perpetual cycle of fear and violence and those misguided efforts for revenge. One could consider the death penalty itself as a demonstration of the social adoption of revenge, an eye for an eye. Maybe it's time to send a message to entertainment creators. And we might use the strategy of the film called Network. We could say, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. Mm-hmm. You want to say that? We're mad as hell, we're not going to take it anymore. The second thing that Heather Strang suggests is to get involved with friends and neighbors to promote love, to promote justice, to promote empowerment. As you have done by joining in this community, you have made a conscious commitment to be actively involved in joining forces with others who do what they can to spread more peace and love and wholeness. As communities, as allies. The third thing, to spread love and peace in our everyday encounters, where we turn random acts of kindness into our daily experience. We can pray, if you pray, or meditate about how to promote peace and love in our part of the world, as well as the world at large. We could use everything we have to promote love and peace for everybody. One way to do that is to be conscious of how we think and talk about ourselves and those around us, especially those we see as somehow different. The only way we can get to a world with love as our primary operating system is if we can achieve that tipping point. If there are enough people in our society and in the world who are actively dedicated to living with consciousness of how they can promote love and peace. We have Peace Corps volunteers who originally went out almost 60 years ago, 58 years ago, to try to understand that the American model is partly to communicate our values, but it's also to listen to the values of others in the world. We are still learning that lesson. It is still a minority position, unfortunately, in our nation. So, we still have to clean up the ways we think about ourselves and those around us, but we shouldn't and we don't have to do this work in isolation. We have to assemble a team like this community here, like what the Buddhists call a Sangha. Because if we act in isolation by ourselves, there are things we don't see about our own problems, our own issues, our own warped perspectives that get in the way, that sabotage our ability to be the people we want to be. A love revolution requires self-awareness. And the way we get there requires community awareness. At this time in our world's history and the evolution of human beings, we're each presented with terrible crises. The crisis ideogram in Mandarin, I am told, includes both danger and opportunity. We have this time of danger and opportunity to break out of the destructive cycle, the insanity of blame and fear and war and hatred and violence, if we are willing to take consistent and focused action to bring constructive behavioral and attitudinal transformation into our own lives and through us to try to bring a love revolution to the world we know. Yes, as the Communist Manifesto said, we have nothing to lose but our chains, not to bring about a dictatorship of the proletariat, but to bring about a connection, a real connection of respect and compassion and love. If we practice what we preach, we have a chance. If we do not, then there is no chance. Come with me on the road to transformation and love revolution. I pray to see you there. Blessed be. Amen.